What happens when two people stop talking about work and finally listen to themselves? Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today, we're going to explore a very different side of Linda and Quang as they step away from the pressure of the construction site and take a slow walk through the streets of Hanoi. No deadlines, no responsibilities, just quiet moments, honest conversations, and emotions they've been holding back for far too long. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos. The morning comes later than usual. The sunlight slips through the thin curtains, soft and pale, not sharp like the mornings at the construction site. For the first time in days, there is no alarm ringing aggressively, no phone buzzing with messages about schedules, materials, or delays. Linda lies still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, her body heavy with the kind of tiredness that sleep alone can't fully wash away. She sits up slowly, rubbing her temples. The exhaustion isn't just physical. It's the kind that settles deep inside after days of constant pressure, deadlines, safety checks, arguments, responsibility. Outside the window, the city sounds feel distant, muted, as if Hanoi itself is giving her space to breathe. In the small living area, Quang is already awake. He's not in his usual work clothes. No helmet, no rolled-up blueprints under his arm. Just a simple shirt, sleeves loose, a cup of coffee resting in his hand. He looks calmer than he has in days. "You're up," he says quietly when he sees her. Linda nods, forcing a small smile. Barely. Quang studies her for a second longer than usual. He doesn't ask about the site, doesn't mention progress or problems. Instead, he takes a slow sip of coffee and says, "How about we take today off?" Linda blinks. "Off?" "Completely," he adds. "No site, no calls, no meetings, just a walk around the city." She lets out a short laugh. "You sound like you're proposing something dangerous." Quang smiles faintly. "I think what we've been doing lately is more dangerous." There's a pause. Linda looks down at her hands. She knows he's right. After a moment, she exhales and nods. "Okay, one day. That's all it takes." They step out into the late morning air together. The city feels different when you're not rushing through it. The streets are alive, but not overwhelming. Motorbikes pass by. Vendors call out softly, the rhythm of Hanoi moving at its own pace. They start walking without a plan. No destination, no map. Linda notices how strange that feels, and how relieving. Usually, every step of her day is planned, measured, controlled. Now, she lets Quang walk slightly ahead, setting a gentle pace. "You've walked these streets a lot," she says after a while. Quang nods. "More than I realized." He gestures toward an old building they pass. "When I first came to Hanoi, I used to walk past here almost every night. Didn't have much to do, nowhere to go." Linda glances at him. "I never imagined you like that." "Most people don't," he says calmly. "They meet me after everything's already built." She thinks about that, about how she's only ever known Quang as someone steady, composed, in control. It's easy to forget there was a time before all of this. They turn into a quieter street, lined with old trees. Sunlight filters through the leaves, casting uneven shadows on the pavement. Linda slows down, looking around, really looking this time. "I've been in Hanoi so long," she says softly, "but I don't remember the last time I walked like this. Not for work. Not to get somewhere." Quang chuckles. "The city notices when you stop running." She smiles at that. They continue walking, side by side now. Their shoulders occasionally brush, not enough to be awkward, just enough to be noticed. The conversation drifts naturally. Short comments, observations, comfortable silences. Quang points out small details, A cafe he used to sit in when he couldn't afford much more than a single drink, a bookstore he'd visit just to escape the heat, a street corner where he once waited for news that would change everything. Linda listens. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't analyze. She just listens. At one point, she asks, "Were you scared back then?" He thinks for a moment. "All the time." That answer lingers between them longer than expected. By the time they reach the lake, the noise of the city softens even more. The water stretches out calmly, reflecting the sky. People sit on benches. Couples walk hand in hand. Elderly men play chess under the trees. Linda sits down, exhaling deeply as if she's been holding her breath all morning. Quang sits beside her, leaving just enough space, not distant, not too close. For a while, neither of them speaks. The silence isn't empty. It's full of things neither of them has said yet. Linda watches the water, her reflection breaking and reforming with every small ripple. Finally, she speaks, her voice quieter than before. "I'm tired," she admits. "Not just today. Lately." Quang turns slightly toward her but doesn't rush her. "I'm used to being strong," she continues, "used to handling things. But sometimes, I don't even know when I started caring so much." She lets out a breath that sounds heavier than her words. "I don't really talk about that." "I know," Quang says gently. She looks at him, surprised. Not by his words, but by the way he says them. No judgment, no expectation. "You don't have to fix it," she adds quickly, almost defensively. He shakes his head. "I'm not trying to." That simple answer makes something in her chest loosen. She nods, grateful, and looks back at the lake. They sit there longer than either of them expected. The sun moves higher. Shadows shift. Time feels slower, kinder. Eventually, Quang stands. "Coffee?" Linda smiles. "As long as it's not a business meeting disguised as one." He laughs. "I promise." They walk toward a small cafe tucked away from the main street. Inside, it's quiet, the kind of place where people speak softly without being told to. The walls are worn, the furniture mismatched, the atmosphere warm. They sit by the window. Linda wraps her hands around her cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "You know," she says, "I never thought rest could feel this unfamiliar." Quang looks at her. "Maybe that's how you know you need it?" She smiles, this time more easily. Outside, Hanoi continues moving, but for now, they don't have to keep up with it. The cafe grows quieter as the afternoon drifts on. Outside the window, the light softens, no longer sharp or demanding. Linda stirs her coffee slowly, watching the surface ripple, then settle again. She realizes she's been sitting like this for a while without feeling the urge to check her phone. That alone feels unfamiliar. Quang leans back in his chair, one arm resting casually on the table. He looks relaxed in a way Linda rarely sees. No guarded posture, no constant readiness to respond to a problem that hasn't even happened yet. "This place hasn't changed much," he says. "I used to come here when I needed to think." Linda glances around. "It feels like time moves differently here." "That's why I liked it," Quang replies. "It doesn't ask anything from you." She nods, letting that sink in. After a moment, she asks, "What did you think about back then?" He smiles faintly. "Mostly whether I was making the wrong choices." "That doesn't sound very different from now," she says lightly. Quang chuckles, then grows a little more serious. "Maybe not. The pressure just wears a different face." Linda looks at him closely. "You don't seem as calm as people think you are." "That obvious?" he asks. "To me," she answers. For a brief second, their eyes meet. It's not intense, not dramatic, just honest. Quang looks away first, picking up his cup. "Being calm doesn't mean not being afraid," he says. It just means you learn when to show it. Linda considers that. I think I did the opposite. I learned when not to show it, until I forgot how. Quang doesn't respond right away. He listens, the way he did by the lake. That quiet attention gives Linda the courage to continue. Everyone expects me to be strong, she says, decisive, reliable, and I am. But sometimes I feel like if I stop moving, everything will collapse. Quang sets his cup down. It won't. She lets out a small, disbelieving laugh. You say that so confidently. Because I've tried stopping, he replies, and the world didn't end. Linda looks at him, surprised again, not by the words, but by the vulnerability behind them. They finish their coffee slowly, no rush. When they step back outside, the city has changed its mood. The afternoon heat fades, replaced by a gentle coolness. The streets are busier now, voices overlapping, footsteps echoing. They walk again, this time closer than before. Not intentionally, just naturally. Linda notices it but doesn't pull away. As the sky darkens, streetlights flicker on one by one. The glow reflects off windows and puddles, turning ordinary streets into something almost cinematic. Do you ever think about what comes after this project? Linda asks suddenly. Quang glances at her. After? Yeah, when it's done. When there's no reason for us to be standing on the same site every day. He slows his pace slightly. I do. And? She presses gently. He exhales. I think about whether I'd still recognize myself without the work. Linda absorbs that. I think I'm afraid of the opposite, she admits. That without the work, I won't know who I am at all. They stop at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. People pass by them in groups, couples laughing, families talking. For a moment, Linda feels like an observer of someone else's life. The light turns green. They cross together. Further down the street, the noise fades a little. Quang breaks the silence. You know, when I first started, I thought success would make everything clearer. And did it? No, he says honestly. It just made the questions quieter. They're still there. Linda smiles to herself. That's oddly comforting. They reach a quieter stretch of road, the city lights reflecting softly on the pavement. Linda stops walking. Quang turns back to her. There's something I want to ask, she says, hesitating. He waits. If one day, she begins slowly, this project ends, and there's nothing tying us together professionally anymore, would you still want to walk like this? The question hangs between them, heavier than it sounds. Quang doesn't answer immediately. His expression shifts. Not uncertainty, but thoughtfulness. He looks around at the street, the lights, the night settling in. I don't know what that would look like, he says finally. But I know I don't regret today. Linda nods. That's enough. For now. They resume walking, the distance between them smaller than before. The city hums around them, alive and indifferent, yet somehow supportive in its own quiet way. As they near the end of the street, Linda feels lighter. Not because her problems are gone, but because she's no longer carrying them alone, even if nothing has been explicitly said. She glances at Quang. Thank you. For today. He smiles. We should rest more often. Careful, she teases. That almost sounds like advice. He laughs softly. Just an observation. They stop where the road branches off. For a moment, neither of them moves. Same time tomorrow? Linda asks, half joking. Quang meets her gaze. We'll see. They share a quiet smile before turning their separate ways. Linda walks on, the city lights stretching ahead of her. Behind her, Quang watches for a moment longer before heading off himself. Neither of them knows what tomorrow will bring, but tonight, the questions feel less heavy, and that feels like a beginning.
Trong tập này, Linda và bà Linda theo bà và cậu cháu ra nương mía. Dưới nắng sớm, bà vừa chặt mía vừa kể chuyện ngày xưa. Dậy à, chặt 3 hoặc 4 khúc cho đẹp để bán được giá. Đồng mía cao dần, 45 đồng trở thành hy vọng cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến khiến cả nhóm kêu, rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống, Linda buồn bã vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. CEO Quang ghé đến lắng nghe và trấn an sự và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Qua Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.